This morning, everybody, we have, it's our pleasure to have David Maidment with us. Those of you who've been coming to Travel Talks for a while might remember David came in October 2013 to speak to us. I met David on the railway platform at Loughborough Central, Great Central Railway, earlier that year, I suppose. And he had a stall promoting the Railway Children Charity. And I remember we had a lovely conversation, and I'd heard about the Railway Children Charity, but I didn't really know very much about it. And I quickly realized what an amazing charity it is, and also that David's incredible journey to setting it up. David worked for the British Railways for many years, and he retired in 1996, I think, David. But anyway, we'll hand over to David and let him tell you his story. So just to say welcome again, and also welcome to those of you watching our recording of this on YouTube.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be here once again. I'm not sure how many of you heard my talks before. So I shall be covering some of the same ground to make sure that everybody knows, because there may be some who haven't heard it before. Yeah, as was said, I worked for the railway actually for 36 years. Started off as a station master in the Welsh Valley. And at the end of my time, I finished up as head of safety after the Clapham accident, you may remember. And, anyway, as a result of some of my work, I was asked to go overseas, and it was on one of my journeys back into this country. I came via India, and I actually came face to face with the street children. So in fact, that was a stimulus. I'll tell you a bit more about that later on, but it resulted in the founding of the Railway Children Charity, which is now a 25-year-old charity. And I was chairman of it until I've been doing it. We had a rule that you have to retire when you're 70. So they let me stay on for a couple of years after that. But I decided I'd retire as chairman before they had the embarrassment of trying to shift the chairman had gone gaga. And they now call me founder ambassador. It's a very posh title, but it means I go around and talk to people about the Railway Children. So without more ado, let's talk that the Railway Children is a charity. It's about a medium-sized charity. It now has about 5 million a year turnover. And we probably work with somewhere around 20,000 children every year. But I'll tell you a bit more now about it in detail. What I'll do, first of all, before in this morning session, I'll talk about the Railway Children Charity, what it is, how we set up, some of the stories of the children. And then perhaps later on or after the break, I'll talk about how we've been affected by the coronavirus, and what sort of alterations that's forced us to make in the work that we do. It starts off by saying, yeah, we believe in a world where no child ever has to live on the streets, which means that our aim is to make our charity redundant, so that we're not needed anymore. I would that were ever likely to happen in the near future, but it won't happen in my lifetime, unfortunately. The Railway Children, as I say, we are a charity that is set up to work and support and protect street children anywhere, internationally, and particularly for those on the transport networks of the road, the railway stations and bus terminals and so forth, which is why we call ourselves Railway Children. I'll talk a little bit more later on about why the railway station. We have a sort of three-level activity that we undertake. The first and most important one is actually supporting and protecting the children themselves, particularly when they first run away, when they're picked up, trying to get to them before the wrong people do and abuse and exploit them. So first of all, to protect the children and then support them. And then our second level of activity is to actually try and improve the environment in which they are, to educate the people who come into contact with them, not to abuse and exploit and see them as a nuisance, but to actually look after them and care for them and try to make them safe. Yeah, we try to protect the children. We try to educate the people around them. For instance, the vendors on the station, porters, the cleaners, and not to throw the kids away or out of the station, but to actually support them and bring them to our organisation. And then the third thing we do is we try to educate governments, because, you know, we can spend all our time trying to help the children and dealing with the immediate symptoms, but in the longer term, we actually want to actually impact on the policy. And so therefore we present lots of information that we've gathered, the evidence that we've gathered, present them to governments to try to get policy change. And this slide shows where we are at the moment. The Railway Children over the last 25 years has in fact worked in about 10 different countries. But a few years ago, we actually said we must concentrate more to try and make a bigger impact with governments and rather not spread ourselves around too thinly. And so we now work in India, where we started, whereas it says there India probably has the largest number of street children in the world. The government actually estimated a few years ago that it was somewhere between 12 million and 18 million. It's that vague. In Africa, East Africa, we work in Kenya and Tanzania. And it says there, as you see, 250,000 children live in the streets and slums of Kenya. And then we can't neglect the problems on our own in our own country. Back in 1989, 1990, when I was first thinking about the Railway Children, and I'd been overseas, I was introduced by the British Transport Police to 2 Salvation Army officers who used to go around the big London railway stations every night looking for runaway children who were at risk. These 2 Salvation Army officers told me they picked up 3,600 children on their London stations over a 10-year period. That's an average of 1 a night. And they also told me that a child on one of our London stations at that time, and that would be the late 80s, early 90s, had on average between 10 and 20 minutes before they'd be actually picked on and exploited by a paedophile or a drug pusher or somebody else who would harm them in some way. And so we've always devoted over 20% of our income to actually working with street children, or actually we call them runaway children in this particular country. We actually produced a report called Off the Radar, which we presented to government about the situation with runaway children and their vulnerability in this particular country. Next, please. So how did I actually start? Well, I'd been out on railway business in Australia, came back via India, and my family had sponsored the the education of a child in the city of Bombay. I know it's now called Mumbai, but everybody calls it Bombay there. And this sponsorship was through Save the Children, and arrangements were made for me to go and meet the child and their grandmother. And on the way, I got a bit lost, finished up at a big railway station. While I was pulling my map out to sort out where I was, out of the crowds, because it was the morning rush hour, came a little girl of about, I don't know, 6, 7 years of age, filthy dirty, begging. And I hadn't got any loose money. I waved her away. To my horror, this little girl suddenly produced a whip from behind her back and started lashing herself. And I just was dumbfounded. I didn't know what to make of this. And she did it again, and I was so upset by what I saw that in fact I panicked and just fled. And I thought, after a while, pulled myself together and thought, I can't leave her like that. Went back. I couldn't find her. And I continued on my way, and the vision of that little girl haunted me. And when I got back to this country, I just could not forget it. And so I started trying to find out who helped kids like that. I got involved first of all with Amnesty International, with their International Children's Network. Found a lot of a lot of the cases they were dealing with were street children, particularly from Latin America. Then a few months later, I became their representative on a group of charities working for street children called the Consortium for Street Children. I attended a meeting there and tried to find out what everybody's strategy was. And I found a gap. We did a risk assessment and I found a gap that nobody was actually targeting what I thought was the most vulnerable time of all, which was those first few hours when the child's run away or been abandoned and they don't know who to turn to for help or what to do. And they're so easily vulnerable to anybody who will pick them up and exploit or abuse them. So I really conceived the idea that we must get to those children first and try and offer help. Try and offer a night shelter, a drop-in centre, somewhere where they can be safe while we try and find out what the situation is. This particular picture is a picture I took in the taxi rank out of that Bombay station. Two little girls who are begging. The little girl on the right is about the same age, I think, as the one that accosted me. And the difference is this was a bit better dressed. So we started off, I got some of my colleagues in the railway industry interested. And we started trying to find partners through the other organizations in the consortium. We started, the first one was in Romania. And then we were at a bus station in Mexico. And then I got involved with India, which was, of course, where the idea came from. And I found a charity in working in Calcutta. And they had a drop-in centre on the station, an old signal box right at the end of Seattle station at Calcutta. And that we started funding, and it spread from there. And as I say, India is now one of our main areas. I found that when I started visiting India, looking for partners, wherever I went, every time I got out of a station, I just got mobbed by street children. And I actually took a day off once and went to Agra to see the Taj Mahal. Here I am just getting out of Agra station. Immediately, the boys flocked up. They all wanted money, of course. And then they wanted their pictures taken. And then, of course, they wanted a rupee each for having the privilege of their pictures taken. But they're, as you see, they're looking cheerful, but goodness knows what sort of life it is. They spend time around the stations. They sweep out the compartments. They pick up anything that can be recycled. I find there are about 4 different sorts of children at these stations. First of all, you get the new arrivals, the most vulnerable ones, the ones actually we wanted to help. Then you have boys, older boys, who've been there for donkey's years and have got themselves into all sorts of nefarious activities, some legit, some not so legit. And then you have actually whole destitute families, sometimes living on the stations. The children being sent out to beg or to do any odd jobs, anything that can earn a few rupees. And then lastly, you have children that are coming in from the suburbs, commuter children who are sent into the large stations to try and find ways of earning money and so forth. Here's a little fellow at Delhi, New Delhi station. He approached me, can't see it there, he's got a bag on his back, but he had a shoe shining kit. And he came up to me determined to clean my brand new sandals that I was wearing. And I saw the colour of what he intended to put on, so I gave him 10 rupees not to clean my sandals. I wonder why he was there, because street children don't have shoe shining kits that they can afford to buy themselves. He's been given that by somebody, so somebody is exploiting him. And I bet most of the money he earns goes to that other person, whether it's a father back home sent out, or whether it's somebody who's trafficked him, picked him up to do it, I don't know. But anyway, he's just one of the many children trying to find work around the big railway stations in India. Probably 80% of the street children that you see are boys, but an increasing number of girls are found on the street. And of course, it's not so easy to find them because they're very vulnerable and they try to hide away. In fact, I'm told in India, many of the girls actually dress up in boys' clothes and cut their hair short to try and pass them off as boys because they feel safer that way. I was actually walking around this railway station in a place called Vijayawada, which is in Andhra Pradesh in the southeast of the country. Huge city of about 800,000 inhabitants, big railway junction, a bit like the crew of the India Railways. And I was being taken round by a former street child from Manchester. Now a man, but when he was a 14-year-old, he ran away from home and lived for a year on Manchester Piccadilly Station, or just outside in the sidings, with a number of older boys who got him all sorts of mischief. And when he was about 17 or 18, he went off to India with the Beatles on their Maharishi trip. Got involved, liked India, saw the street children, knew he'd been one himself, and set up a home for them. He took me round and he told me about the danger for girls on the station. He said at any moment there can be 50 or 60 girls like this one, who can't have been more than 8 or 9 years of old. I picked her up, I took this picture of her portering. If the older porters find her, the regular ones, they'll throw her off the station because she's doing them out of tips. So we managed to get money from the lottery fund to actually set up girls' homes in India. With the money, $250,000 we got back in 1998. And we set up 6 projects for girl children, street children, in different parts of India. At that station in Vijayawada, Matthew, that runaway from Manchester, had set up the very first child assistance booth, or cab, as we called it, on the railway station at Vijayawada. And he got that little kiosk there, and he and one of his staff used to man it round the clock. And it had a free phone helpline, 1098, that was linked to Childline India. And people would bring children to him and he'd record them and then offer them a place in his drop-in centre. And we picked this up, we liked this idea, and railway children started talking to the Indian Railways about this, particularly the Indian Railway Police, the Railway Protection Force. And that developed into a process for the whole of the Indian Railways. And we actually pioneered the cab idea, and here's one at Lucknow in Uttar Pradesh, in the north of the country. The guy in the center there, he's one of the helpers from a local volunteer partner organization that has a drop-in center. But some of them are manned by people from other charities who've been franchised now to run these cabs, some by the members of the Railway Protection Force, usually women officers. The children are registered and then found somewhere safe to be. It may be a government home, it may be a partner home, while we sort out what the problem is and how we can best help. And so in the early days, particularly before I built up much of an organization, I used to go out to India a lot to see some of the partners and check how they were doing, look for new partners, and visit some of them to see what was happening at first hand. And I found that the children were absolutely delighted that somebody was taking an interest in. I think the teachers or their helpers at the organizations had boosted their morale by telling them that somebody was coming from England all the way to see them. And of course, these are children who've been rejected by so many people over the years. And so they wanted to share what they'd done. And here they are showing me their mathematics that they've been doing, their English that they've been learning, and getting me to mark their papers. A more popular activity was to take me out and play cricket with me, because they always wanted to, I used to ask them if they wanted a present. And I used to take a cricket bat out or something like that, because I knew that would be very popular with the boys. The first thing I had to do was to go out and face them on their rough pitch, their fast bowlers, without any gloves or pads or anything like that. So I used to go away crack and blue. The kids used to think it was hilarious. But that way, anyway, as I said, I got involved myself going round. The critical thing here, as I say, is it's all about early intervention. That get them, protect them safely like this. So what we do to really make it early We have people who street walkers, volunteers from the street children organisations who will walk the platforms when the main trains are arriving, looking for new arrivals, looking for children that are on their own, that look a bit lost or helpless, and trying to get to them before the wrong people do. Very often we use former street children who've now become part of the organisations because they know more than anyone else who the danger points are and who the danger people are. And they can often get the confidence of the street children because they've been one themselves. So they bring them to the drop-in centre where we usually have a motherly type, a grandma type who will befriend them, give them something to eat, somewhere safe they can sleep overnight while we try and find out what their stories are, why they're there, why they've run away. I mean, they may just be lost. It's quite easy to get lost on Indian railway stations. In fact, we got, I think it was about a quarter of the children that we met last year back home. We may then try and find out, you know, if they've been bullied or if they've run away because they weren't doing well at school or whether they got into trouble with their parents, all sorts of reasons. And we're looking to see what is the next thing that we can do. But the problem is that so many of these children have been so badly treated and not believed and so forth when they've told people previously, that we find it very hard to get their confidence, their trust. And so it may take several days, even in some cases several weeks, before we can get their story. So they're protected during that time until we can find out a little bit more about them. So as I said, we try to get to the bottom of why they're there. And we find some are being bullied. Some have perhaps not done very well at school and they're frightened of what their report is going to say and their parents' trouble. There's a lot of violence. A lot of children, in fact, are beaten up at home or something. There's domestic violence in the homes all too often. And of course, some of it is just sheer poverty. And the children are sent out to try and earn money. I found 4-year-olds on the street being sent out to do begging or try and earn some money. And of course, it's only too easy then for the children to get lost or to be picked up by older street children into gangs. And they find that they're permanently on the street rather than at home. So as I say, the first thing we have to do is to try to protect them, give them something to eat. Here's one of our partners. 2 women have gone around one of the stations and found this little girl desperately hungry. So the first thing they do is feed her. Then they will try and get her confidence and bring her back to the night shelter. And then the work starts to support her and, as I say, sort out what in the longer term is possible. One of the things we do is to find a presence on the station. Sometimes, you know, the night shelter or drop-in centre may be a few minutes walk away from the station. So we need a presence on the station itself to attract the interest of the children. And in many of them, we run what we call a platform school. So this is a platform school on number 1 platform at Ahmedabad railway station in the state of Gujarat. And every morning our partner organisation has 2 teachers who go down 10 o'clock in the morning and set up their stall with these old newspapers and a few crayons. And anything 20, 30, 40 kids come out the woodwork, sit cross-legged and have lessons on the platform. Very simple ones. A little bit of mathematics, a little bit of their language. And of course, all the time, as well as teaching the children, they're trying to find out the stories behind the children, find out if they can move them into the drop-in centre and what their stories are. There's only one snag with this school. Every time a train comes into that platform, the kids rush off and go and scavenge through the train. So we have to stand school down for 20 minutes till the train's gone. And luckily, the train service isn't quite as frequent as that at Crewe or Leicester or anywhere, or wouldn't get much work done. One of the children that we found at that platform school was this lad here, Pintesh. When Pintesh was 9 years old, his dad, on the right there, who was a drunkard, an alcoholic, took Pintesh out of school and sent him to go and work to earn money because the man was unemployable. Pintesh worked at a local tea stand. And one day he dropped something and broke it. And the stallholder lost his temper and grabbed the nearest thing off the stove that was red hot and burnt Pintesh as a punishment. The boy ran away, and we found him at that railway station that I showed you last time. And our social worker, who was from the partner organisation, eventually got out of him the story as to why he'd run away, but found he missed his mum. And so she found out where he lived in the slums and managed to negotiate to take him back to visit his mum when his dad wasn't around. And that worked for about 2 months. And eventually they negotiated with the father when he was on medication and managed to get him home. And he went back to school. The father allowed him to go back to school. And then he worked for a different stallholder in the afternoon who promised not to ill-treat the boy. And that actually worked so well, the father actually gave up alcohol. And not all of our projects are as successful as that one. We worked for a while with an organisation, one of our partner organisations, that specialised in running camps for children to try and reorientate them with the idea of going home. We obviously don't send a child back home to where it's been an abusive situation, but roughly over the last few years, a quarter of the children that we found on Indian railway stations and in Africa, we've actually managed to get home. And we don't just take them home and leave them there. We follow up a month later to see how it's working, and then 3 months later, then 6 months later. On several of the trips I've had to India, I've actually accompanied the staff of the partner organisation back to see the children at home and see what they're doing, see that they're not just being sent back working again and not gone to school and that sort of thing. I think we've now come to the stage where we're going to show you a video. The railway children have a number of promotional videos, and one of our staff here obviously talks to the screen. So
around the world, tens of millions of children are struggling to survive on the streets, facing violence, exploitation, and often death. Hands up if you think even one child is too many. Good, us too. We are railway children. We fight for children on the street. We've been doing it for over 20 years and we're good at it. And we won't stop until we live in a world where no child ever has to live on the streets again. So how can we get there? Simple. We find out why children are on the streets and we change things so they never have to go back. Okay, it's nowhere near as simple as that, because a bed for the night might get a child off the street, but then what? Well, then our work really starts. For lasting change, we have to work on 3 levels. We fight to reach children on the streets before abusers, drug dealers, and traffickers do. Finding them shelter, food, and support is the first step. But we can't be everywhere at once. So through training and support, we turn people at key locations on the ground into our eyes and ears. Then they can spot vulnerable children themselves and help them before it's too late. We work with governments because if the system doesn't change, nothing does. We make our voice heard until we get the policy changes that keep children off the streets forever. In our first 22 years, we helped more than 300,000 children. In the next 5, we aim to reach 150,000 more. Here's how we're going to do it. In the UK, we'll be working directly with the British Transport Police to create a national safety network safeguarding vulnerable children on and around the UK transport system. We'll establish safeguarding projects in 6 of the most needed locations and provide therapeutic services for children and their families. In East Africa, we'll work intensively on the streets in at least 12 cities, reaching 15,000 children and helping them recover from the impact of violence. In India, we'll increase our number of child-friendly stations to 25, working directly with government children's homes in those areas. We'll also train and support 15,000 government personnel to help vulnerable children. That'll mean 120,000 children will be protected and 96,000 returned to their families. But we want to reach even more children, and we can't do that on our own. So here's the plan. We'll make sure our time-tested model is replicable. Then we'll support and empower other organizations around the world to use this model to reach more children than we ever could by ourselves. Together, we can create a world where none of our children have to live on the streets ever again. Are you with us?
Right, I talked to you earlier on about the sort of traditional way that we've worked in railway children. I will go on talking in a moment about the impact of coronavirus, but I promised you a story. And first of all, we showed you that video. The first person to produce a video of our railway children work was actually the BBC. And a few years ago, of course, they did comic relief and then sport relief. And we had a number of grants from Sport Relief for our work in India. And Patrick Kilty, the comedian, Irish comedian, went out to host or front the BBC video to India and visited one of our projects down in Tamil Nadu at a place called, oh, was it Andhra Pradesh, somewhere like Villapuram it was. And we'd had a young lad who'd run away from home when he was 8 years old. And in fact, we've been picked him up later and Patrick Kilty took him home. But the story was that this lad had come home from school one day, found his mum crying. She was crying because she was absolutely destitute. She had no food at all in the larder, and she had a large family. And this lad came in, and he was the oldest of the children. And he thought, well, I better make my own way in the world. You know, I'm obviously too much of a burden. We're all too many. I'm the oldest. I must go out and make my own way in the world. And at 8 years old, he ran away. And for 2 years, he survived on India's railway systems. And then one of our partner organizations on the east coast of India picked him up at our drop-in centers, got his story, managed to find out where he lived. And they found out that his parents had actually been looking for him for 2 years. And so in due course, he was prepared to go home. And he was equipped with a new school uniform, a little bit of money to see him on his way. And Patrick Kilty actually took him home. And 2 years later, Comic Relief went out again. And Patrick Kilty wanted to find out what had happened to VJ. He found him standing at the railway station at Villapuram in the afternoon. And he thought, oh dear, he's run away again. But in fact, he was going to school in the morning. And in the afternoon, he was going to the station to act as a helper to the local voluntary organization, looking for street children who were running away and taking them to the project, to the drop-in center. And they'd given him a little badge. And it said social worker. He was 12 years old. Patrick said to him, well, look, next time I come back, I want to see you with a little badge that says the boss. So one of the things we do find is that a lot of the children who've come through our systems feel so obligated, so grateful, that they want to actually take part, they want to offer. And one of the most frequent things is that they, as I said earlier on, they often act as the persons who wander around the stations actually looking for the children, are paid to do this as a volunteer, as a station worker. In that particular way. Actually, one of the lads I remember playing cricket with at Sialda Station in Calcutta, must have been 1998, I think. And the local trade union had given us one of their rooms as a drop-in centre for the children. In the little alleyway outside, the kids were playing cricket. And so I got involved and I played cricket there. And I got a photograph of the kids and me playing cricket. And last year, I was contacted by somebody from the Calcutta organisation who was in London for a conference. And he arranged to meet me on Waterloo Station. We had a coffee together and he said, do you know, he said, I was that lad you played cricket with back in 1998 in Sialda Station. And he's now one of the senior managers of that particular project. So we find a lot of the street children, in fact, come up and contribute something back. I've told you about the way we try to work in Railway Children. We had great plans for expansion of this, getting our income from 5 million a year up to about 8 million a year, increasing the number of projects that we work with, increasing our work in East Africa, looking to see if we could expand to Uganda as well as Tanzania and Kenya, and looking to franchise some of our work to other organizations so that they used our similar system. But of course, coronavirus has caused a bit of a hiccup. And in both ways, one, it's changed the way we have to work. And two, of course, it's stopped a lot of our fundraising activities, although we've been very fortunate in many ways that the railway industry in particular has rallied round, and we've managed to maintain our income, although not grown it to be able to expand it in the way that we wanted to. If we think about it, and I'll show you some slides and talk about the work we're doing in the coronavirus period. India. Now, all of our work in India is on and around the railway station. Elsewhere, I'll tell you it's in different places sometimes. But in India, the railway station is the hub for these children running away. That is the way in which people in India travel. This is a lad like Vijay. This isn't Vijay, but it was about this same age, and here's one of the lads on the station. But there's a problem with coronavirus because during India lockdown, and one of the first things that happened was no trains ran. Therefore, there was nothing at the stations. The stations closed. So no trains for the street children means no work. And no work means no food. So they were in a desperate situation. Both children, the actual runaways, children were in gangs of street children on their own, and children that were used to being sent out from families to beg and to work on the stations. And our India team, we actually have about 15 members of our organization based in India. We have a Street Child India, a Railway Children India project, just as we have a Railway Children Africa project, which enabled us to get money from India as well. And our team in India then moved to a different way of working completely, primarily to try and contact the children around the stations and in the slums that were adjacent to the stations, to take food parcels out to them, to take masks to them, to teach them hygiene, to teach them safety in the coronavirus situation. And if you see on the left-hand side there, it says we provided food and emergency supplies to just under 3,000 families in India. So we're probably talking of 6,000 children at very least. And our family, our team have been going out from all the partner organizations. We have about 14 or 15 different partners at different stations throughout India. And they will go out taking food parcels out, as I say, to the slum families and to the children that they find out there, even though the stations are closed. They did come back in for a while, but you've probably seen on the TV that India is now in an awful state. In fact, probably in the worst state in the world. They had, I think on the TV last night, it said they had over 300,000 new cases last night, just yesterday. And so it looks as though they're going to a lockdown situation again. So our work in India is going to have to continue with this sort of emergency work to try and contact the street children during this particular period. If you look at the bottom, in Africa, as I say, we work in Tanzania and Kenya. And again, we've had to take food and masks and hygiene work out into the slums. Most of our work there, very few kids are at the stations because the railways in Kenya and Tanzania are not that frequent. But a lot of the work is around the taxi stands, the matatu stands, the bus stations, And so the same principle is there, early intervention to try to get them before the wrong people do. And we move into the slums, where we know a lot of the street children come from, where there's a lot of violence. One of the things we find is that the street children in Africa do seem to suffer a lot of violence, more so than in India. India, it's neglect and exploitation and abuse. In Africa, there does seem to be an awful lot of violence, both on the street and in the domestic situation. And so we actually have a lot of work there with the courts, actually protecting the children and trying to protect them through the court and through the legal systems. One of the things that we're doing in Africa is that we're trying to help the Tanzanian government implement the new United Nations guidelines on street children. One of the things that the Consortium for Street Children did in recent years was to actually lobby the United Nations on the rights of street children, trying to see that they got an opportunity to receive their rights as well as any other children. And trying to draw up about 20 guidelines for government on policies that they should adopt for street children. And the United Nations actually passed these guidelines officially at the General Assembly, and they are now published. The first country to adopt them was Uruguay, and we railway children have no contact with. The second one, which is trying to adopt them, has committed itself to working towards it, is Tanzania. And the government has asked railway children to help them do that in the 6 major cities in the country. And to that end, we are being funded by the British government through what used to be the Department for International Development, and through the United States USAID. And money is being channeled to help us and our partner organisations actually work to implement these government guidelines with the Tanzanian government. But as I say, a lot of our work at the moment is emergency work to try to reach children and keep them safe until we can go back in and open up all the drop-in centres and so forth that we were able to before. And then on the top right, you see 2 British Transport policemen with a young person on one of our UK railway stations. I told you before what the situation was 25 years ago at big London railway stations. I thought the situation had got better in Britain, but it was just hidden. And about 3 or 4 years ago, the BT police, because we were expanding our work in the UK, the BT police came to us and said, you know, we're still picking up an awful lot of children on our UK stations. They said the problem seems to have moved out of London. The hotspot in the country now is Manchester Piccadilly. And they gave us the 10 stations in the UK where they were picking up the largest number of child runaways. And as I say, Manchester was number 1, but it included places like Liverpool, Leeds, Doncaster, Glasgow and Edinburgh, Hamilton in Scotland, Croydon in Surrey, and also some of the London stations. Used to be King's Cross in the old days, but there's been so much work done in that area. The problem areas now seem to be south of the Thames at places like Victoria and Waterloo. And so the police actually told us that last year, I think it was 2019, they picked up 10,000 children on our UK railway stations. And the problem was, they said, we don't know what to do with them. First of all, we often take them to sell. We just can't get hold of social services out of ours all too often. So we can't spend some time in the police cell. Then we take them home, or we take them to social services and they take them home. And no, 99% of the cases, the kids are just taken straight back where they've run from. They're meant to have a 45-minute interview with the parents or the carers to sort things out, but you know, social services and BT police are so stretched for resources that often doesn't happen. And in any case, 45 minutes is totally inadequate to actually try and solve the problems that some of these kids have. And so we actually have now a formal partnership with the British Transport Police, who actually have paid professional counsellors, which are railway children's staff, based at the key locations. And the railway police will then refer the problem children that they get, whether the solution isn't easy. They will then refer them to us to follow through with their families and through with the child until such time as we've reached a satisfactory solution for all concerned. We had three councils we set up, first of all, in Manchester Piccadilly Station, in an office adjacent to the BT Police there. And that office, those three councillors cover the Preston, Liverpool, Manchester triangle. The second one, which we funded in London, is based in Euston, but it covers all the London stations. And I said a lot of the stations seem to have the most runaways. In fact, I'm told, I think it was in 2019, Croydon South Council had the largest number of runaways in the country. And so we have 3 in London, and then funded by Children in Need, we were able to open up a further 3 councillors in Leeds. And they cover the Leeds, Hull, Doncaster, Sheffield area. We're now hoping to be able to set up something in Birmingham, which was another hub. We're wondering if we're seeking see if we can get money out of HST, their funding, because obviously the high-speed route going to Birmingham, there ought to be some contact there. So that will be our next one when we get the resources to do it. And then we're talking to the Scottish Government about something for Edinburgh and Glasgow. So that's what we're doing at the moment. Now, you'd think that when so few people are travelling by train during this lockdown period, that the problem of runaway children would have disappeared. And it's reduced from perhaps 10,000 a year down to 7,000 or 8,000 a year. But the children that come are in desperate need. The situation is worse in this particular time of lockdown for children who have got problems at home, bad relationships with their parents, or even domestic violence situations. To run away during this particular time is particularly hard for them. And so we're finding more children actually being referred to us by the BT Police. And we're finding it then harder cases, needing much more attention from us, and we need more resources to do it. So the upshot is, during this coronavirus period, we've had to alter our situation just to run to stand still. We've been very fortunate that, as I say, that our income has held up. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But the workload has got harder. And so we've had to concentrate on that rather than being able to meet our 5-year plan and actually expand our work into Uganda and other countries and franchises elsewhere. And last year, this slide says that we were able to reach 15,822 children last year. That's actually less than we normally would because of the coronavirus situation. It's harder. We're normally about 20,000. About 3 years ago, we did a calculation. We reckon we'd helped over 300,000 children since we'd started. It must be over 400,000 by now. Our income to help us do this comes in 3 ways. First of all, we've always had a big partnership with the railway industry. The railway industry really has 2 charities. It has one for its own people, called the Railway Benevolent Fund, which funds railway workers who've run into problems where there have been injuries or illness or death in the family, and they've looked after urgent situations like that. Although that, thank heavens, the need for that has very much reduced in recent years. And then we have the railway children. And the railway industry has been fantastic in supporting us, particularly since privatisation. All the different private companies do all sorts of sponsored activities. We have an annual ball every year in one of the biggest hotels. Now it's at the O2, where we get 1,200 people from the railway industry having a major ball every year, which raises about £500,000 in one night. We have various events like we have a train that takes us to the foot of the 3 biggest mountains in the British Isles. And so we have a 3-peak challenge by rail. And that raises a couple of £100,000 through sponsorship of different railway companies who sponsor some of their staff to climb those mountains. all sorts of other things. And over the years, the railway industry has probably produced about 50% of our income. Grants from government and other organisations like Comic Relief and Sport Relief and Children in Need produces another quarter of our income. And then the rest comes from our general support, from Talk Sky and other people do, from Rotary clubs and Probus clubs and Inner Wheel, churches, schools. And of course, that's probably the area that's been hit hardest in this last year. A lot of people have been very good online contacting us, but I've not been able, and my colleagues have not been able to do the school visits and church visits as we can, during this particular period. One thing the railway industry did last year, they realised they wouldn't be able to have their ball at the O2. And that was a potential loss of 500,000 income. And so they developed, within the railway industry, the committee that runs the railway ball got together with the heads of all the different companies. And they produced what we call Rail Aid, which is a bit like a big telethon, a bit like Comic Relief, where all sorts of different railway companies did sponsored things during the week of Rail Aid to raise money. And it was so successful, it produced £534,000, more money than we would have got in the ball itself. And they're going to repeat that this year. And apparently there is a third sector award, award every year. And the Rail Aid partnership that we did with the rail industry has been shortlisted as one of 3 for the award, which is to be announced in May this year. So we've been very fortunate. A lot of charities have suffered a lot of loss of income during this particular period. As I say, we haven't been able to grow as we planned to grow and to undertake the new work that we set out. But at least we've been able to keep our existing work going and meet the new situations. I promised you earlier another story, and with this story, perhaps I want to sign off and then we can have some questions and answers. This little girl's called Babley. Well, that's what the other girls called her. She didn't actually know what her name was because she'd been born to street children on the street. We found her with 30 other young girls in Calcutta on Howrah Station in Calcutta. The youngest was 4, the oldest was 13. They'd all been abused or molested. It was the railway staff at the station who drew them to our attention and said, you know, these kids here, that they really are in a dreadful state. Can you do anything for them? And that was when we got the grant from the lottery fund. And that was one of the 6 projects that we were able to do with that money. We found a local organisation at Calcutta. And they with the money we produced, they leased a house about 5 minutes walk away from the station. And they opened it up. In fact, to start off with, they borrowed a school, a little local private school. And the kids used to come in at 6 o'clock in the evening and have a wash, clean clothes, shower, clean clothes, a hot meal waiting for them, and then they could sleep there safely overnight. But of course, they had to go out in the morning because the school wanted its classroom back. But eventually, of course, we got a lease and they were able to come permanently off Calcutta Station. Anyway, when we opened the project, the helpers, the managers from the project came and I came, and we all sat out the front, and the girls came and some of the staff from the station came, and the girls all sort of sat cross-legged in the front row. And the men from the organisation made lots of boring speeches. Well, I say they were boring. I didn't understand it because it was in Bengali. The children obviously looked a bit bored. And this little girl came out in the middle of one of the talks and plonked herself on my lap and fell fast asleep. And they told me her story. They told me that she was one of these 30 girls and so forth. And anyway, that was that. I told later on, she got quite ill, but she recovered. They looked after her. She went to school. 10 years after this picture was taken, this office where I'm sitting now received an email, and it just said, "Thank you for giving me my childhood back. Love, Badly." And that, you know, people often say to me, what can you do with, you know, all these hordes of children, the millions of street children there are in the world? Doesn't it, you know, make you frustrated? Of course it does. But at the end of the day, if you can just help one child, the smile of that one kid. I once, one of our partners in India had met Mother Teresa, and she was apparently asked the same question: how do you help so many children? And her answer was, one at a time. And that's what we can do. Any help that any of you can give, however little it is, you know, it's surprising how much you can help with just small amounts of money, particularly in India, where the cost of exchange, cost of living is so much less than here. But anyway, that's the railway children. I think we've got a last slide from the railway children here, which is just our official thank you to everybody. Thank you for your support. And I think what we've got 10 minutes or something like that left. I'm very happy to try and answer any questions that anybody has.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. Thank you. That was very moving. It's very uplifting to know all these things are going on, and your story of how you know, started it all off is incredible. Do you know the film Lion?
I do indeed. We've had two films which have been big supporters of railway children. The first one was Slumdog Millionaire. Remember that?
Yeah.
That told the story of a lad from one of the Bombay railway stations. A true story, which actually culminated in after they showed the film right the way through. The lad ran away when he was about 5 years old, got picked up by a government home, finished being adopted by from Australia, was brought up and did well in Australia. When he was in his mid-20s, he searched for his family and eventually found his mother. In the last 10 minutes of the film were actually filmed of the reuniting of the real lad with his real mother. Mm. And the film star who acted that out was
Dev Patel.
Thank you. Yeah. Dev Patel. And he became a major support for railway children. He did a number of links for us, And when he appeared in, when Lion was done, he actually asked that Lion linked with the Railway Children website. As a result of that, we had £250,000 in donations directly through that Lion film. So that's been very helpful. We have, because of we set up a few years ago as a Railway Children India and Railway Children Africa. That allows us to fundraise in those countries as well. About 80% of our income for our work in India actually comes from within India itself. The Indian government actually passed a law about 4 years ago that required major companies that had that were working internationally in India to give 2% of their profit to charity. Mm. And, you know, that we've got £500,000 from Honda, I think it is, and there's another big charitable organisation that is funding a lot of our work in developing those child assistance booths on the stations.
Yeah, I do recommend that to people. If you can get hold of that book, Lion, or watch the DVD, it's really amazing. And I think they have a Facebook page as well, which talks about railway children. We've got Anthony Das with us from India. Anthony, he heads up a charity supporting children who have to work, and based in Kolkata. And Anthony writes here, at this moment here in Kolkata slums, children, all those who were rescued and put into the government school are now back on the street and taken up work as rag pickers and as drug peddlers. This pandemic pandemic has made things worse, and all our efforts are now in vain. We can only retain 25 boys with us. The rest are back on the street. That's really sad, and that, you know, that sort of echoes what you were saying, David, doesn't it?